The French Empire was the largest empire in history. While it may not have been as long-lived or as influential as the British Empire, at its greatest extent, the French actually controlled more land than the British ever did. How did this happen? Why don't we hear about the French Empire today? And why did France lose its chance to rule the world? This is how France nearly ruled the world. Taking a look back, the French colonial story started out like many European colonial stories, with explorers looking for trade routes to Asia. But it would quickly become clear that France wouldn't be making it over to Asia anytime soon. So instead, they began exploring and conquering other areas of the world. The French established their first colony in 1627 when they set up the colony of Canada. Over the next century, they would establish colonies all across the world from the Caribbean to India. This period of exploration and conquest would come to an end with the 7 Years' War. This war would be fought all around the world between the great powers of Europe. It was a war that France would ultimately lose. Though there were some bright spots for France during the war, like the capture of Fort William Henry, overall, it was a terrible war for them. They lost most of their possessions in India, and they also lost New France to the British. To add insult to injury, the war would end with the Treaty of Paris, where the British would gain additional territory from France. In North America, the French would only get 2 small areas to keep, which would be Guadeloupe and a small area around the Great Lakes. Despite losing the war, though, France still had a massive amount of colonial possessions. They had just lost a significant amount of territory in North America. But in South America, they had gained even more territory after the war. Over the next few decades, France would attempt to hold on to their remaining colonies in North America, but it would be increasingly difficult as the United States grew and became stronger. France would attempt to help the Americans during the Revolutionary War, but ultimately the Americans would win the war and become their own nation. At this point, France realized they could no longer hold on to their territory in North America. With the Louisiana Purchase, France sold its territories west of the Mississippi River to the United States. This deal was beneficial for both sides. The United States gained a huge amount of territory, while France got a lot of money to boost their economy. There was one part of North America that France didn't give up on, though, and that was the island of Saint-Domingue. This island was incredibly valuable for France due to its production of sugar. Unfortunately for France, though, the people living on the island had other plans. Haiti would declare independence from France and become the first country to ever overthrow a colonial power. Though Haiti would eventually become independent, it wasn't without a fight. The French army would attempt to put down the rebellion, but it would be a tough battle. In the end, the Haitians would win the war and become free. Although France would lose this war, it was actually good news for the rest of the French colonial empire. Napoleon, who was the leader of France at the time, needed money for his wars in Europe. So he saw the opportunity to get rich by selling the colony of Senegal to the Dutch for 25 million livres. He would also sell the colony of Guyana to the Dutch for 9 million livres. During the Napoleonic Wars, France would also lose control of the Cape Colony, Mauritius and Seychelles, to the British. After Napoleon was defeated at the Battle of Waterloo, much of the French colonial empire was in jeopardy. Many colonies that were loyal to France now declared independence. The Dutch seized control of the colony of Guadeloupe, while the British took control of Martinique. The Dutch also took control of the colony of Bibas, while the Portuguese retook control of their former colony of Brazil. After all of this, France only had 8 colonies left in the world. Despite losing almost all of their colonies in the Americas, France still had a massive amount of territory. If you would add up all of the French territories in the world, they would make up a landmass larger than the entire continental United States. Of course, this isn't really a fair comparison since a large portion of these lands were uninhabited. But nonetheless, it was a massive amount of land. What's even more impressive is that this was just the overseas territories of France. This doesn't even include the metropolitan area of France itself. If you would add in the metropolitan area, then the size of the French Empire would be comparable to the size of Russia. Although France had a massive amount of territory, they weren't anywhere close to being a great power. After losing so many colonies, France's population was only 28 million people. This would be nothing compared to the giant empires of Russia and Britain, who both had over 100 million subjects. During the 1800s, France experienced several periods of rapid growth. There was the First French Colonial Empire, which lasted from 1627 to 1763, where France established many colonies in North America. the Caribbean, and India. The Second French Colonial Empire, which lasted from 1763 to 1814, where France continued to expand its colonial empire despite losing many colonies in North America. And the Third French Colonial Empire, which lasted from 1814 to 1945, where France would establish many colonies in Africa and Southeast Asia. In order for France to get back on the world stage, it would need a strong leader. That leader would be Charles de Gaulle. Under his leadership, France would modernize its military and economy. Once World War II rolled around, France would join the Allied forces and fight against the Central Powers. While France would be defeated in the war, they would emerge as a major power once again. They had proven that, despite their small size, they were still a force to be reckoned with. Now that France was a major player on the world stage once again, they would set their eyes on getting back some of their old colonies. De Gaulle would lead a movement to end the process of decolonization and instead reassert French authority over its former colonies. He felt that France had a duty to help its former colonies develop, and that the best way to do this was to keep them under French control, despite his efforts. Though most of the French colonies would declare independence, only a few of the colonies would remain loyal to France, but they would prove to be very valuable. These colonies would form the basis of the French community, a group of territories closely tied to France that would give France a lot of wealth and power. The most valuable of these territories would be Algeria, which would provide France with cheap oil and raw materials. Other valuable territories would include Tunisia, Morocco, Senegal, Madagascar, and, of course, the overseas departments of Guadeloupe, Martinique, and French Guiana. As the 1900s went on, France would grow closer and closer to Westeros. This would culminate with the creation of the European coal and steel community, which would also include Belgium, Italy, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands. France was now a major power in Europe once again and was beginning to assert its dominance on the continent. However, their success wouldn't last forever. In 1958, the Algerian War would begin. This would be a war that France would ultimately lose. As the war dragged on, it became increasingly clear that France couldn't win. The Algerian people were determined to win their freedom, and the French public was growing tired of the war. In 1962, France would finally recognize Algeria as an independent nation. With the end of the Algerian War, France's role in the world would come to an end. They were no longer a great power, and their colonial empire had shrunk dramatically. Today, France has only 5 overseas departments left in the world, which are French, Guiana, Guadeloupe, Martinique, Reunion, and Mayotte. These overseas departments are closely tied to France and will likely remain French for many years to come.